environment, manage the labor market, manage what I call the shekel space, the economy, the import-exports. And then it could be, and one never knows, in Bosnia, for example, without great resolution, the Confederation of Bosnia is creating better and better relations between previously warring nations. In a decade or so, it could develop, so the Joint Council is much more powerful. It's elected by the two peoples. And there will be also more democratization of the two spaces with urban city regions, and we developed the whole idea of a devolved, more local urban, and here comes my urban expertise too, because when you manage Beersheba together as a binational space, Jerusalem together, or Haifa together, you don't carry the whole history of Jews and Palestinians on your shoulders. You're more concentrated on local issues, on housing, on environment, on schools, and usually the conflict relaxes a bit in those. And we feel that this is something that could mobilize Jews and Palestinians. And so far, there's a lot of interest in this because it's not two states that are fortified and bordered. Freedom of movement is one of the main principles here. And on the other hand, it's not the one state that does away with Jewish or Palestinian sovereignty. In a way, in a kind of twisted history that we live in, it's resurrecting the 181 resolution of the UN. And while it reads as a partition plan for Palestine, if you read the content of it, is actually a confederation, or even close to federation, because the title of it, the subtitle of it, is an economic union, right? It's called a partition plan for Palestine with an economic union, right? Jerusalem is, as I said, was supposed to be an autonomous corpus separatus that will have its own urban city-state, if you like, and of course belonging to both the Palestinian and the Jews. And the freedom of movement, the joint labor market, the joint currency could actually mean that rather than terror and violence, we're actually getting integration and economic development. And I know it's slightly optimistic, but we need to be a little bit optimistic. And it draws my optimism from living for many generations on the land. My mother was born in Haifa. My grandfather was born in Haifa. And we were neighbors of Mahmoud Darwish. I even met him a few times. And some of it draws on the love of the two people, the Palestinians and the Jews, to this land. So he writes famously, "Oho jarhi al-mukaber watani laysa hakiba, fa'ana laysta musafir, ana al-ashik wal-watan al-mahbuba." So my everlasting woods, my homeland is not a suitcase. Of course, he writes it precisely at the moment when his homeland becomes a suitcase, when he becomes a refugee. And I am not a traveler. I am a lover, and my homeland is the loved one. And this is answered, actually, with one of Israel's Jewish great poets, Yehuda Amichai, and both of them died quite close to one another. I think Amichai died in 2006, and Darwish died in 2008. At the time, he writes about Hamakom. במקום בו אנו צודקים לא יפרחו עוד באביב פרחים. המקום בו אנו צודקים הוא קשה ורמוס כמו חצר. אך ספקות ואהבות הופכות אותו לתחוח, כמו מחרשה, כמו חפרפרת. ולחישה תשמע במקום בו עומד הבית שנחרב. In the place where we are righteous, no flowers will bloom in spring. The place where we are righteous is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and love make it ground, like a plow, like a mole. And a whisper will be heard where the demolished house once stood. So with this kind of humanistic love, and with all the echoes that exist in it for the exile, for the trauma, and for the love of people and land, I end my talk. Thank you.
I hope you all appreciate that we have heard something really extraordinary here this afternoon. Not only has Professor Yiftachel given us what I think is the most almost never hear anymore in discussions of the Palestinian. That is to say, after all of this rather grim and pessimistic story, we have actually heard some original and creative thinking about how the usual dismal projections might actually be circumvented. And I think that's really unusual. So this has really been, I think, one of the most, if I may say so, one of the most enlightening analyses of this long-standing perennial problem that I have heard in a long time. So with that, let's open up the floor. We have about half an hour for your comments and questions. And if you would identify yourself and make your comment or question as brief as possible so that we can get more people heard, that would be much appreciated. And I will let Oren handle the Q&A himself if he would prefer to do it. Sometimes it's better to take 2 or 3 comments or questions in a block, and then he can respond to them, or you can do it seriatim, one by one.
You are the sovereign here. So.
But sovereignty is a contested concept, I think we have learned. So yes, please.
Shukran, Oren Yiftachel. That's very powerful and informative. If hypothetically, if you have the ear of the key players, let's say Netanyahu, Hamas, the leaders of Hamas, Hillary Clinton, with all the vested interests, and with all the work that you have done, what would you be advising them towards a real tangible peace and to a real sustainable foundation for long-lasting reconciliation?
Actually, interestingly, Israel is such a small society that sometimes we do happen to have the ear of the people. And my work with B'Tselem, actually, I met several times with ministers and with Netanyahu too. Not that he listens too much, but you know, I try to, and some people try to listen, is to try to draw on the incredible knowledge that we have. Professor Hudson, we know that now, as saying, in the last 30 or 40 years, we've gathered enormous knowledge about what actually works. We know the rules. We know, well, it's not medical formula that if you take an aspirin, your headache goes away, but we know quite a lot. And what we know, this scenario, is problematic, is disastrous for the two peoples. You know, to be entangled now in a 50 more years of apartheid kind battle, we know what happened and we know how explosive it is. So in that respect, I'll try to impress that on them. And I think deep down, some of them know it. Some of them, for example, Benny Begin, the minister for minorities that I've had a lot to deal with, and sometimes you actually meet for a drink. He's the son of Menachem Begin. He knows. He is saying he's breaking his mind how to have Jewish control over the whole land and have a democracy. He's at heart, he said, I have two conflicting values that are inherited from my father and from Jabotinsky that I realize now are irreconcilable, right? So this is a real dilemma for a lot of hardcore Zionists. But I would, and that's what we're trying to do. We were trying to see to what extent the problematic process of colonization must end. It's illegal. It's carrying, you know, injuries and scars for everybody for generation. And also it doesn't lead the Jews for security, which is for us is what really, and I end my previous book with a whole chapter about Jewish security in the Middle East. I mean, Jewish security in the Middle East is not 200 atomic bombs that foreign sources or Vanunu says that we have. Jewish security is actually integration with the Palestinians, right? This is, and vis-a-vis Iran and vis-a-vis all the threats. And that is something that has to be immediate. Now, in terms of practical steps, the land system that I'm expert on, the planning system, can provide many of the answers. The Israeli High Court rules, you know, there's some rays of light. It's not all dark. The Israeli High Court ruled in a petition that I was one of the expert witnesses that all land and all public resources should be distributed, should be allocated with distributed justice in mind. For example, a concept like this, and the great knowledge that we have now about the land system, you could start a system of land reform. And this is such an important element in Palestinian culture and all dispossessed groups to make it more equal. You could, of course, treat seriously the issue of Palestinian sovereignty and international law. After all, it's ironic because Israel was created by international law. Israel, in its first sentence of the Declaration of Independence, mentions the UN decision, right? So there is these elements, this philosophical element, if you like, international law, acceptance, security, and practical steps that in my field of land and urban and regional planning, very quickly you can make a program of equalization and what we call affirmative action that can make an incredible difference. And we had experience with that. In 1993, 94, 95, in the Rabin's second government, he declared with his overall peace strategy also steps towards reconciliation with the Palestinians inside Israel. And big part of it was actually to whiten the gray spaces, we call it. It was, he appointed a committee in opposite which I appeared twice to how to legalize much of the illegal or unauthorized building. He provided, he doubled the budget for education for Palestinian schools. And that was a golden, very, very short golden period where you can see surveys data and political voting data, how quickly Arabs came to support Rabin, because in the beginning they didn't, right? So you can hopefully impress leaders that this is the way to go, which is both philosophical, political, morally, and then at the end also in their favor electorally. That's what I can say.
Yes, please.
Romney's made some very controversial and provocative statements about the Palestinians in particular and about the situation in general. I have no idea what he really thinks as opposed to what he'll say to get the nomination and then get elected. But if he were to be elected, do you think it'll complicate further the situation, or will his apparently good relation with Netanyahu help the situation, or is it just not really very relevant?
Well, there are two issues here. One is the Republican Democrats, and the other one is Romney himself and Netanyahu. I think in terms of the overview over time of Republican Democrats, actually the Republicans quite often were better than the Democrats in terms of offering concrete steps towards peace. And George Bush Sr., for example, possibly was one of the best ever with James Baker, right? That opened the process to Oslo with the Madrid, and he was the first and only one so far to threaten Israel with degrading its economic support. And that made a real impact inside Israel. And this is why, because Israel is an economic power, it's very globalizing. It's similar to Singapore in a way that its economy is very globalized, and you know, the patron, the United States, has a lot of clout that it's not using. In the past, the Republicans were willing to use it more than the Democrats. I can't even think of one, maybe Carter. Carter was a Democratic president that pushed Israel a bit, but all the others, Obama,